Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and this time we are talking about new impressive gameplay for Nintendo Switch 2, and not so impressive gameplay for Nintendo Switch 2. Gamescom has been taking place over the last few days, as well as the Fan Expo at Canada, and we've been getting a lot of different footage for different Switch 2 games over these last few days, some of which looks pretty good. Other parts, not so good, and so there's been a lot of conversation about these different Switch 2 games, what we should expect from both first-party and third-party games moving forward. Should we be worried? Should we be excited? And we've even gotten some news on how some games are running, which I find to be interesting, and I think some of you will also find to be interesting. So that's what we're getting into today. But before doing so, let me point out that for the last video that I uploaded on Friday, I had shared that the percentage of watch time for my subscribers is only 34% compared to the 65.6% that are not subscribed, and so I'm actually aiming to get this closer to 50%. So if you do find yourself enjoying my videos, if you enjoy Nintendo news, rumor, and theory videos, perhaps this is your place. But I did put out a little bit of a challenge for you all. If I gained over 100 subscribers in the last video where I talked about this, I would either share some more footage or photos of my beautiful cat Ruby, or do an embarrassing dance depending on what you all preferred in the comments below. And apparently, most people prefer to see more of my cat Ruby as opposed to watching a grown man doing an embarrassing dance. And so we actually exceeded the goal, and so here is a little bit of my cat Ruby. I'm playing with her, she's resting on top of my computer because it's warm. And I just love her so much, she's the best thing in the world to me. But some of you are probably disappointed because there is no embarrassing dance. Well, this is what I'll do. I'm gonna put out another challenge. If this video exceeds 100 subscribers, I will then do an embarrassing dance, and the one I have in mind is that one from Majora's Mask, and I'll probably throw in another picture of Ruby for those who just want to see more of my cat. But now on to the main focus of the video. There are different games we're going to be talking about here. We're going to be talking about some new gameplay for Metroid Prime 4, new gameplay for Pokemon Legends ZA, Elden Ring Tarnished Edition, Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade, Borderlands 4, and Kronos The New Dawn. Now, disclaimer, none of this footage I'll be sharing of these different games from these events is mine, right? So there will be a footage credit for each time I share this video, and of course, if you want to watch the whole thing where there's a lot more to share, I strongly encourage you check the description below where you will see the footage credits with the link so you can go and watch those whole videos to see the entire gameplay demonstration, as always. But there are different things I've noticed about the gameplay footage that has been shown. So first I'll talk about Metroid Prime 4 Beyond from this IGN footage here. And so going into Gamescom, I had an optimism that we might see an updated build of the game, because we've actually taken a close look at the press screenshots of Metroid Prime 4, and looking at those screenshots in comparison to the Switch 2 edition footage we have seen of Prime 4, and even also the Switch 1 version of Prime 4, and we see that there are actually details from the high-resolution, non-compressed screenshots of Prime 4 that aren't apparent anywhere else. And so I've been wondering, is there an updated build of Prime 4 out there that hasn't been shown yet, and could we maybe see that from this latest bit of footage at Gamescom? And taking a look at the footage here, it's all off-screen footage. I don't think it's high quality enough for me to see those details, and also I haven't seen any clarification if this is the 1080p 120 FPS version of Prime 4 or the 4K 60. I would assume the 4K 60 we would get better clarity and details on like the textures and such, which are some of the things we're noticing from the screenshots that look better and have more detail than anywhere else. So from what I've seen so far, I can't tell. However, what I have noticed is that the overall color and lighting appears to be a little bit different from what we saw of the Treehouse footage back in April. This off-screen IGN footage from Gamescom seems to be more in line with what we've seen from the press screenshots from an overall lighting color perspective, but this might not have to do with an updated build. In fact, I would say there's maybe a stronger chance this has more so to do with simply balancing of the high dynamic range settings, HDR. That initial Treehouse footage we saw of Prime 4 Switch 2 Edition back in April may have had HDR settings that lead to an overall darker look, while everywhere else, when it's perhaps more balanced, it looks a bit brighter. So I've seen a lot of conversation from when we did those initial comparisons about a couple weeks ago, that some people actually prefer the darker look. So I will say, if this is all just having to do with HDR settings, you can set your HDR settings to fit that look. But beyond that, from what we have so far, we can't tell if this is an updated build or not. Now, something we've seen a lot of conversation on is Elden Ring Tarnished Edition for Switch 2. There were a lot of reports coming from Gamescom that in portable mode, the performance was really bad. And what makes matters worse, they weren't even allowing press to record gameplay of their experiences in handheld mode for Elden Ring here. But some footage of the handheld mode has come out, and as you see here, it looks okay. Now, it has been said even by the person who posted the video that actually playing it and seeing it in motion, it's actually worse than it looks from the footage we've seen here. And this likely has to do with the limited frame rate of the footage we have here, as well as it simply being off screen. A lot of those issues can be obscured. But we've also seen docked gameplay of Elden Ring, and taking a look at it here, I think it actually looks a lot like how it looked when I played it on my PlayStation 5. Now, I'm not here expecting this game to look and run as well as the PS5 version. The Switch 2 at the end of the day is a tablet, and while we know it's substantially more powerful than the Switch 1, according to Nvidia about 10 times more powerful overall, and we've also heard from developers that Switch 2 punches around Xbox Series S levels, and we've seen some comparisons where Switch 2 games can look and run better than Xbox Series S, or vice versa, it kind of depends. That's still far lesser than a PlayStation 5. But it should also be noted that when Elden Ring came out, it was having performance issues on both PlayStation 5 and PlayStation 4 when it came out. And what we're looking at Elden Ring here is not a final release version of the game. So the optimism is that they will improve things, and that's an expectation actually. Usually, these demonstrations do not reflect the final version of the game. That's why they always say that when you play these demos. It does not reflect the final build of the game. And what some people may be confused on here, they look at Elden Ring performing poorly and they think, oh, this means that third-party games can't run well on Switch 2. No, it kind of depends on the situation. And we're already talking about how we expect performance to improve with Elden Ring once the final Switch 2 version comes out. Now, that doesn't guarantee it's going to run well when it comes out, because as I just said, even on PlayStation 5, there were issues. So I definitely think we should be cautious and have this in mind until we see how the game runs in its final build. All I'm saying right now is that we shouldn't just 100% assume it's going to run terribly no matter what. And there actually have been some games that are impressing people with how they're running on Switch 2, such as Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade. So something that we've seen, or we've heard from Nintendo Life, is that the game is actually running at 40 frames per second in handheld mode. So initially, they thought the game was running at 60 FPS, and then they corrected themselves and said it was 30, but then they actually had gotten word from the reps that the game is running at 40 frames per second in handheld mode, which is a possible feature on Switch 2 in handheld mode. And so the game running above 30 is not expected by many. And from what people have been saying of the game, it looks and runs well, and actually, GameXplain just shared some gameplay of their experience, and it looks really good. It's still off-screen gameplay, but it's some high-quality off-screen gameplay, and I like how this game looks. I'm actually pretty impressed, and I'm very curious to eventually do a comparison of this version versus PS4, because that's when I initially played this game. And I remember it looking pretty good on PlayStation 4 back then, and it doesn't look any worse. I don't want to go so far as to say it looks better. I would want to go and do that comparison, but this looks like a quality version of Final Fantasy VII Remake. So for those who have been waiting to have a version on Switch 2 to play it portably and for it to run well, it looks like that's going to be a possibility, and this is not even the final build of the game. So that bodes very well in comparison to what we've seen so far of Elden Ring. And it's a good sign that yes, there can be some fairly ambitious third-party games that can run well on Switch 2. I mean, we've already seen evidence of this. You look at Cyberpunk, for example, on Switch 2, and I've played the game, and it looks pretty good. It's a good experience on Switch 2. So I really think it's both inaccurate and totally unfair to say that Switch 2 can't run third-party games well. It simply depends, like it does for all platforms. We actually also got some high-quality footage of Borderlands 4 running on Nintendo Switch 2. This is also coming from MD14, who had also shared that docked footage of Elden Ring, and people are noticing that it looks pretty good. It looks like a pretty fine playing version of Borderlands 4, And so that's another example of a decent experience on Switch 2. But another game I would like to talk about is Kronos: The New Dawn. This is one of the big reveals from the most recent partner showcase, and this game is being made by the Bloober team, who's also responsible for the Silent Hill 2 remake, which is heavily praised. And so I've been very curious how the Switch 2 version holds up compared to others, and Nintendo Life has shared some direct feed footage of the game, and from what I see here, it looks fine. It's not the most impressive version, it definitely has me wondering if maybe I should play it elsewhere, but the frame rate is reportedly smooth, outside of one hiccup during this explosion that is pointed out by Nintendo Life. But they go on to say overall pretty promising things about this game and how it plays. It's a fun experience, but they do note that the other versions they saw, like on PC, do look substantially better, as it would on PC. And me taking a look at the footage here, my personal opinion, I do notice a little bit of fuzziness. I do see the aliasing. I do see some of the hair looking a little awkward because of that aliasing, it looks like. But overall, it still looks like a fine looking game. So if you're looking to play a game like this portably, or you only would want to play it on your Switch 2, then this version doesn't seem to be a bad version. But yes, it does look noticeably worse than the other versions of the game, which are more powerful platforms, as they should. But I do gotta say, I look at gameplay like this, and I look at Final Fantasy VII Remake, and I feel like Final Fantasy VII Remake is a much better look game on Switch 2, and I feel like, at least from a visual perspective, they look fairly comparable. Like, I would like to see a game that doesn't have obvious aliasing issues and things like that. So maybe that'll get smoothed out by the time the game comes out, but it is coming out in early September, which is not that long from now. Less reason for me to think that there will be a more obviously updated version of the game, but of course we don't know how old the build is, so that's something else to keep in mind. And finally, we have Pokemon Legends ZA. We've gotten some high quality direct feed gameplay of Legends ZA from Nintendo here, and taking a look at the game, to no surprise from what we've seen already, it's not like an amazing looking game. It's not going to be awe-inspiring for most, but it does seem to be running smoothly at a high resolution at 60 frames per second. There do not appear to be any hiccups, and there are at least some elements of the game that are visually pleasing, others are kind of simplistic, and considering with Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, I'm somewhat okay with them first making sure they can put out a game that runs perfectly smooth at a high resolution and at a high frame rate, and then hopefully they can build on that with the next game. Hopefully something that has an overall better aesthetic and art style with a bit more sophistication to the overall geometry and textures. But those are my thoughts on all the latest big new Nintendo Switch 2 gameplay we have just gotten over the last couple days. What do you think? Do you find a lot of this footage to be impressive? Do you find a lot of this footage to be disappointing in some way? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I will see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.